Welcome to Magic Arcanum. I'm Ryan Gomez. Behind the scenes is Nicole Burdick, and we're so glad you're here because it's story time. Aetherdrift takes us on a winding cross-plane race with a fabulous prize at stake, and it features a 6-chapter story and 11 spotlight cards within the set itself. But if you don't have time for all of that, you are in luck because I'm here to tell you what happens in Aetherdrift. So tune up your suspension of disbelief because you're going to need it for this one as we start our story engines with a flashback to the Phyrexian invasion and meet a character who only exists to create a supremely powerful magical artifact that everyone in the story will be fighting over. Say hello to Ishikari, who doesn't get a card in the set or even in the commander decks, but is instrumental to the entire plot of Aetherdrift. Like many people on Kaladesh in her time, she is an inventor, and she has been working on a device called the Aether Spark before getting rudely interrupted by the invading Phyrexians. Realizing she has no time left to complete her project, she fires it up anyway, and it absorbs her own life force to create a perfectly preserved spark in a box. Please do not ask me how this works, because the answer is just magic. Good vibes. The story then jumps to the present, which is effectively 2 years after the Phyrexian invasion, and the plane has gone through some changes. First of all, Kaladesh is now called Avishkar. In-universe, that's because after the events of Aether Revolt, the people of the plane wanted a fresh slate and renamed their own plane to symbolically distance themselves from the previous reign of the consulate. And in our universe, it's because the name Kaladesh had some problematic translations in certain dialects, and it's not your place to argue with any of that, so please don't even try, okay? Just trust me on this one. So we're on Avishkar, and we meet a young girl named Sita, but she has a secret identity as Spitfire, who loves to sneak out of the house and race vehicles. There is some tension between her and her father, a man who wants to make Avishkar great again, and punish the people who stood up to his beloved consulate of old. Now, Aetherdrift is technically about a road race that covers 3 planes, but that wasn't dramatic enough. So, we have a subplot here with Sita's dad getting involved in a rebellion that will sort of complicate things in our final act. So, save some popcorn for that, I guess. Speaking of the race, it is starting soon, and all of Girapur is caught up in it. So we follow Spitfire to her team's garage in the far corner of town, where we learn her crew chief is actually Pia Nalar, Chandra's mom. Pia had built a tricked-out car and obviously planned for her own daughter to use it for this race, but Chandra decided she wanted to race for another team, figuring it somehow doubled her chances of winning. Spitfire, meanwhile, kind of holds a grudge against Chandra, who gets all of the attention on Avishkar. So Spitfire is hoping to win to prove to the plane that she is the best, not this planeswalker native who spends half of her time elsewhere in the multiverse. Now, Pia loves Chandra and is very supportive of her relationship with Nissa, who, you might recall, lost her spark after the Phyrexian invasion. Chandra wants to win this race to claim the prize, which is the Aether Spark. She will then use that to fix Nissa, so the two of them can explore the multiverse together without being bound by the limitations of the omenpaths. And, I'm realizing, if you haven't paid any attention to the Magic story for the last 2 years, or if you're new to the game, literally none of this is gonna make any sense. And I am sorry about that. Obviously, I try to recap things in a way that makes this massive connected story more accessible, but I feel lately it has become harder and harder, and we have reached a point where all I can say is go back and watch some of my earlier videos because I do not have room here to cover all of the necessary stuff for each of these characters. They cram so much into a single set, and we get so many new cards each year. Storylines have become incredibly tangled, yet also extremely drawn out. And we're just going to have to try and plow through all of it. Alright, so meta commentary on the state of the game's lore aside, I guess we're ready for our first story spotlight card, which is Kickoff Celebrations, featuring front and center, of course, Chandra. In the set, there are 10 different racing teams, one for each 2-color mana pair. I guess that's true in the story too, but I'll tell you right now, we basically never hear about most of them. So I'm not even going to bother with introductions at this point. They didn't. I will just say that all of the teams and their vehicles, or mounts, line up at the starting line of the Avishkar Raceway, our second spotlight, and we discover that Winter is present along with Lute. Winter is a self-serving character from Duskmourn, and at the end of that set's story, we were made to believe Winter became food for a demon named Valgavoth. But I guess we are supposed to infer now that he cut a deal off-screen to save his own hide. Because we all know how understanding and reasonable demons in Magic are. So now he's here, entering the race on behalf of Valgavoth. If Winter wins, he will give the Aether Spark to the demon and, I don't know, earn his own freedom, I guess. And if he fails to win, then the demon will eat him. Winter's ace in the hole, if I may borrow a phrase somehow not used in Thunder Junction, is Lute, who is captured on Duskmourn. Or in Duskmourn? Whatever. Who cares? Lute is special because he has an internal map of all the omenpaths, and so Winter is going to use the little critter to find shortcuts along the race path, which does not make a ton of sense to me because the race doesn't seem that long to begin with, and you still have to hit certain checkpoints along the way anyway, so deviating from the course would probably only make things longer for you in this case. But the man has a plan, so again, whatever, who cares? The race starts, and the first leg of it is through the winding streets of Girapur, which eventually become obstructed thanks to some shoddy construction work on one of the viewing stands, which topples over onto the race course and causes some drama, but it's nothing that our brave drivers can't navigate. Meanwhile, though, we get more into that secondary subplot I mentioned earlier. Spitfire's dad is visited by Jace and Vraska, who tell him, with their help, he could perform a bloodless revolution and restore Avishkar to its former glory. Why they are going through this trouble, I don't know. I thought they were here to get Lute back, but rather than just waiting to grab him when the race is over, they're getting involved in a political coup, and I guess this is supposed to show us the lengths Jace will go through to get what he wants, but Vraska seems to be pretty unhappy, so there is clearly some tension here that did not exist back on Thunder Junction. Anyway, most of the racers make it through an omen path at the end of the course, which brings them to the plane Amonkhet, which will be the second leg of the race itself. Amonkhet is another plane that has gone through some changes over the past few years. The people here are trying to rebuild after surviving the Hour of Devastation, in which they lost many of their gods to the schemes of Nicol Bolas. New gods have shown up to take their place, but most of them don't appear in this main story. The sparkless planeswalker Bothriket is racing on behalf of the plane, and his team does pretty well on this segment of the race, which is taking place on his home turf. Some of the other racers are not so lucky, and they get swept up in a giant sandstorm, but again, most of them make it through to the next Omen Path checkpoint and reach the third host plane, Muraganda. This is a plane we have only seen in passing. It has never been part of the Magic story, really, before now, but players have been intrigued by the idea of a place where having no abilities matters, as teased by Muraganda petroglyphs all the way back in Future Sight. The terrain here is dense jungle, and the racers are increasingly desperate to gain an advantage over each other by any means they can as they maneuver through Timu Zendikar. Chandra is especially frustrated with Winter, who keeps appearing ahead of her, even though she knows she's faster and more skilled. The two get close enough to, throw banana peels at each other, and Lute gets knocked off Winter's car. Chandra goes to save him, figuring that's what Nissa would want her to do. Before she can circle back and reach Lute, though, he gets caught and caged by some raiders, as seen in the spotlight card Perilous Snare. And there with him is the goblin Duretti, who had also been captured. Pretty soon, though, the pair are rescued by Chandra and her mother Pia, which I honestly do not understand, because this whole time I thought Pia was focused on winning the race with Spitfire, but now she's here on Muraganda and nobody really explains how that happened. So yeah, just roll with it, I guess. Pia, Chandra, Duretti, and Lute make an explosive getaway by hopping into the goblin's nearby parked car, but they are chased by the raiders who ride dinosaurs that are able to keep up with a vehicle that literally has a jet engine strapped to its back. Anyway, desperate for a solution, they let Lute point the way and escape the plane through a convenient omen path. Only, maybe it's not so convenient, because it takes them back to Amonkhet and deposits them like 200 feet in the air, and so everything comes crashing down and wrecks Duretti's car. The group must now work together to perform a tune-up that will repair the vehicle and get them all back home, even though with Lute they could probably just walk to another omen path, since they all seem to be shortcuts. I mean, that's how Winter stayed ahead of Chandra for the whole race, but whatever, who cares? We cut back over to Spitfire, who has made it through Muraganda and is back to Avishkar. She's closing in on Winter, who somehow is still in the lead, even though he doesn't have Lute's shortcuts anymore. Spitfire sees the finish line up ahead and gives it everything she has left, but suddenly she and Winter crash into a fence that appears out of nowhere. It turns out Spitfire's dad, with help from Jace and Vraska, has started his second revolution and is putting an end to the race and is starting to round up his perceived enemies for punishment. Vraska tears Winter from his wrecked car and asks him where is Lute, but then Jace just dives into his mind for the answer, and this actually offends Vraska. She feels they haven't done a great job protecting Lute, and she thought Jace would be more patient and understanding, but he's doing a lot of the whatever it takes style of problem solving, which she thinks will set a bad example for their adopted child, but Jace says, well, we'll just have to worry about that later. We cut back to Lute and Chandra and the others who have fixed up Duretti's car and are now driving it across Amonkhet, searching for the original race course and the known omen path at the end of it, when Lute again indicates a different direction. Realizing now that he has the power to sniff out hidden omen paths, they follow his lead and pass through one of these magical gateways. This time, it deposits them in the skies over Avishkar, but Duretti modified his vehicle to be better at crash landings, which makes this a skill check, but the story spotlight card says they count on luck. They survive another harsh introduction to the ground and come face to face with Jace and Vraska. Jace does the old, I don't have time to explain, so just get out of my way thing, and uses his mind magic to make Lute go limp, which, again, makes Vraska uncomfortable. Suddenly, there is a bolt of lightning, and the sky goes dark overhead as a dragon appears out of nowhere. Okay, it's not nowhere. It's one of those dragon storms that have been appearing in all the stories lately. So now we've got, like a 5/5 with flying and haste to worry about? Sure, that seems right. Jace tells Chandra she can go be a hero and stop the dragon if she just hands over Lute, but she refuses. So Jace uses his mind control magic on some nearby racers to carry out his unstoppable plan. Will and Rowan don't want to hurt the slumbering knights, who are under the control of the villain's magic spell, so they have to... Wait a second, hold on. That was a different story where the exact same thing happens. So I must have just copy-pasted a line here. How embarrassing. I am so sorry. Anyway, Spitfire realizes Chandra needs help and jumps into the fray going full throttle. Pia and Duretti are also there, and the four work together to subdue the other mind-controlled racers without permanently hurting any of them. And as for that dragon, well, don't worry about it, because Elspeth appears and cuts it right out of the sky. Don't look for that on any card in the set, though. Nissa also makes her way into the action, but is too late to stop Jace from knocking out Chandra and taking loot. He and Vraska vanish, but since Vraska can't planeswalk, that must mean there was another convenient hidden omen path that only Loot could see right there in the middle of the street. But, whatever, who cares? As most of this is unfolding, Basri and the Amonkhet racing team push the limit and make one last play for the finish line, which does win them the race. We jump ahead a little bit and see Chandra recovering from her wounds and talking with Elspeth, who explains these dragon storms are all over the multiverse now, and even as an archangel, she's got her hands full with that. Pia then reminds everyone they have a party to get to, so they hop into a car being driven by Spitfire, who says her dad is in jail for his part in the coup, but she seems at peace with it because now she has friends like Chandra and Nissa and Pia. They then join the Hour of Victory, which is just Basri and his team celebrating their win, and we get one final teaser scene with Jace and Vraska and Loot taking their first steps on Tarkir. And that's it. That's what happens in Aetherdrift. Now, obviously, I have some thoughts about the content of this story, so let's get right into that with a little segment I like to call the Mustache Minute. Ready? Here we go. The Aether Spark. It was created by a citizen of Kaladesh, now Avishkar, and found in the rubble of the Phyrexian invasion. The government held on to this invention of unknown power until they decided to just hand it over to whoever won their state-sponsored road race. This thing is treated as a rare and desirable item, but this is also home of Saheeli, who managed to reverse engineer a time machine for Teferi a few stories ago. We also still have Karn out there, who has been known to create copies of artifacts at will, and since he bears incredible guilt for both the Phyrexian invasion and the resulting loss of sparks among his planeswalker friends, could he have not made replica Aether Sparks for anyone who wanted one? Failing that, they probably at least should have had some restrictions on who could enter the race with such a noteworthy prize at stake, right? I mean, you have no reason to allow Winter and the Speed Demons to be there. It is obvious from a glance they're up to no good, so why risk letting them have it at all? It's your race. You're a government agency committed to peace and prosperity and trade across the multiverse, now connected by omenpaths, for better or worse. If you hand the Aether Spark over to Winter, and he gives it to a demon who then comes along and devours everyone, who do you think they're gonna blame? Yeah, the whole thing belongs in a museum. Or they should have done a rudimentary background check on any team wanting to enter the race. But Ryan, what about all the corruption? We know Gonti is in charge of a lot of things now, so maybe they made some shadowy backroom deal to allow Winter to enter the race. Maybe. Or maybe they were just busy on Thunder Junction doing absolutely nothing. Whatever, who cares? I guess that brings us to Jace and Vraska, who are here to rescue Loot and finish carrying out their own goals of purifying the multiverse. But for some reason, they decide to partake in a casual revolution instead of displaying any patience or capacity for, making a plan. Jace acts more red here than blue, and I think Vraska is right to start questioning him and his methods. It's becoming clear he is obsessed with his own vision for the future, and the fact that he sat on Avishkar for the entirety of the race, which is like 3 days, mind you, only to then tell Chandra he doesn't have time to explain his plan. Just... I think the quality of Magic's storytelling has really fallen. The speed at which new sets are released makes it impossible for anything to breathe, much less grow and flourish. We don't even get back-to-back sets on a single world anymore. We're constantly racing off to the next thing. And the next thing is just mannequins wearing hats instead of meaningful people, places, and events. I don't want to be all doom and gloom, though, so let's try and end on some good notes. Duretti, for example. He was a very fun supporting character. He offered tea to Pia and Chandra after their crash, and he provided advice on how to treat their pending concussions. Then he immediately improved his wrecked racer so that the next time they fell out of the sky, it had makeshift wings available to soften the landing. He was polite, resourceful, and interesting. Still not sure what he would have done with the Aether Spark if he had won it, but that's also true for most of the other racers. Oh, and I did enjoy seeing Basri again. He ran a clean race and even stopped to help protect civilians during the dragon attack near the end. The Hour of Victory card is a nice throwback to the original Hour cycle, in which everything was terrible, but now we get a happy outcome for the people of Amonkhet, and that is something I can get behind. Ultimately, though, was this a good story? Did the Spotlight cards tell you everything you needed to know? Or should Elspeth and the dragon at least have gotten some flavor text in there somewhere? Let me know down in the comments, and then make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the great stories you'll only find here on Magic Arcanum. We'll see ya.